We're now on Daf Tzadi Heyom at Beis, and we're talking about Rav, who's standing on the side of this river, and he's watching a man that Mechaver Reshe, right? And Nafal Mineh. He's got the head of an animal, a kosher animal. He's holding it, and he drops it into the river. Now, again, I guess it was heavy or it was oily, whatever it is, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but he couldn't hold on to it, and he dropped it into the river. Also, icy silta and shada. So far, so good until I get to the next two words, asik train. He went ahead, this man, found a fishing basket, and he fished up a head from the river. That would be fine. But that's not what happened. What did he fish up? Asik train. He finds two heads, which means that somebody else, I don't know what the statistical probability of this happening is, somebody else also dropped a head into the river, in the same river. And when he went fishing, he came up with two heads in his basket. And Omar Rav says, Avdi Nami Hachi. This is not a normal situation. Person drops a head of an animal that was shechted and he finds two heads. So therefore, Rav says that apparently there were heads in the river even before this guy dropped his head in the river. His head meaning he owns the head, not his head, but anyway. So what did Rav Paskin? Asrinu Nile. He told him, forget it, buddy. You think that you found the head that you dropped from a shech geschachtena animal. No. I'm going to assume that there were more heads there and they were treifa, nevelis, and you can't eat either one of these two heads. Amile Rav, Kahana Rav Asi Rav. So apparently when the word got out about this ruling of Rav that this guy can't eat any of the heads that he fished up, and they said to Rav, the Isura Shchichi, that Tera lo Shchichi. Why are you assuming that if there were other heads in the river, they were non-kosher heads from Nevela? Maybe they were kosher. Amalahu, the Isura Shchichi Tfe. There's more of a chance, it's more commonplace, statistically, to find nevela means unslaughtered meat that fell into the river. That's more common. Now, what does this mean? L'chora, this is Rav Shita of Basar Shenisal Min Ha'ayin. Also, why? Because we have to be concerned with the possibility that the raven took whatever he took. He likes to eat heads. And he took away the kosher meat, brought back in its place non-kosher meat. So the Gemara says, okay, now that you've proven conclusively from the story of Rav with the heads in the river that Rav is worried about Basar Shenisal Min Ha'ayin, that maybe the raven came, is Chimechlal Amai. Why did you have to make the statement that Rav was not explicit, but only we derive this by inference from the story of Rav? And the Gemara answers, Parvasa diovdi kacham havi. Rav's case was not necessarily Basar Shenisal Min Ha'ayin. The reason why Rav said that the heads that he finds in the river are non-kosher heads is not because of the raven, but because it was a port of idolaters. And therefore, the meat that would have fallen fell from the idolaters who were running the port, and it's definitely, or probably, non-kosher meat. And Teda, I'll prove it to you. The Karmelei, Sur Shchichitve. Why did Rav say that there were more heads from treifa animals that would have fallen than kosher animals? The answer is because the port was a non-Jewish port of idolaters. in any event, at the end of the day, the Gemara sort of leaves it as an open-ended thing. We don't really have an explicit statement of Rav that Bosish and Solomon I, we have to worry about because he didn't supervise for a minute that the raven came and switched the meat. But Tosfos points out that from the story of the Mishnah Machshirin, which records the machlokes between Rav and Levi, and Rav said that the meat is asur b'achila, and the whole heter there is only because of nevela, tumas nevela. You see clearly that Rav held that Bosish and Solomon Ayin is asur. Frek the Gemara la Rav hechi achol bisra. How could Rav ever eat meat? Is there a situation, the Gemara is asking naively, where from the moment of shechita until the moment that he sits down and eats his steak, he had his eyes supervising the meat, and there was never a second in time where the meat was left for the ravens? So the Gemara answers, the only time Rav would eat meat was if from the moment of the shechita until the moment that he ate the meat, he never took his eyes off the meat. Ibai Seymo. Okay, maybe we shouldn't go this far. You mean to say that Rav required supervision every second? But b'tzayra v'chasuma. Okay, so what happens is that after the meat is shechted, Rav would require that you tie up the meat and put a seal on it. That's called a chosem. In fact, in poskim we'll see there's one sheet that says you need a chosem and another chosem. One seal and then another seal on top of that one. So you know for sure that this meat was not switched by a raven because it's got the seal on it. This reminds us of Chanukah a little bit, with the Pak Shevet. Inami, I could give you another way that Rav would be able to identify the meat as if he had supervised it. B'simana. Maybe there was a simon on the meat itself. He took a red magic marker and a black one, and he made X's, half red, half black, and now he can recognize the meat. This is the same meat that we shechted, because immediately afterwards we put the simon on it. Ki had Rabba barafuna machatech le atlas karnos. So Rabbah had a minhag that when they finished the shechita and they did the salting or whatever else they had to do, they would cut the meat into triangles. This is really fascinating because what happens in a case where you find meat in the street and most of the butcher shops are non-kosher butcher shops, but you found a triangular meat? Do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, when I construct a rove, do I look at the rove shochtim, who probably slaughtered this meat or didn't slaughter the meat because they're going to, or do I look at the meat itself? Anyway, this is what Rabbi used to do. He wanted to make sure that there was no ravens who switched the meat, and therefore he cut it into triangles, and he came back and he was able to identify that meat with a triangle. Rav Havikozel Bei Rav Hanan Chasane. Okay, now we're about to embark upon kind of like a sugya within a sugya of nichush. The Torah prohibits nichush. Again, in the English translation, I think they translate nichush as divination. We start reading signs. Remind me to tell you a story about Reb Chaim Shmulevitz and my brother, if we have a chance at the end. Anyway, Chazi Mabra de Ka'asi Li'ape. You know what? Rav said this can't be coincidental that the ferry is coming towards him as if to say, inviting him to join the ferry ride and cross the river. It was like a simon, a divination in Rav's mind that God wanted him to cross the river. Omar, he declared, Mabra Ka'asi Li'ape Yom Tov. You know what? There must be some reason why, how do you say in English, Nizdamilo, he chanced upon this ferry that was going across. I guess maybe the ferry left once a day or once a. Also, Kama Bava, his daughter lived on the other side of the river. He gave the ferry, took the ferry across the river, knocks on the door of his daughter, his son-in-law, and Odik the Dasha. As he's waiting at the gate of his daughter, he looks through a crack in the door. Chazi Chevasa Italia. He sees that there's slaughtered animals that are hanging there. Apparently, they shechted meat. Why did they shecht meat? There must be a celebration, some sort of rejoicing occasion. And it was Min HaShamayim that he would be there on time to be there. He's like the Zayda. Maybe they did a chalak. I don't know what they did. Taraf Abava, he knocks on the gate, and everybody comes out to greet him. Nofak, Ose, Kuli Almal, out the Zayda's here. Wow, this is great. He's going to join us. Osa Tabche Nami. And amongst the people who came out to greet him were the Tabachim, the local butchers, who had shechted this meat that was hanging there. And Rav stood there, didn't take his eyes off the meat for a second. Lo olim Rav einimine. Amar, he declared, Echu hashta. You know what? You butchers are not doing this right. It just happened to be that I was here because I took the ferry, and I didn't take my eyes off the meat. Sfisu lahu isur lebnei bris, they brought. If not for the fact that I supervised it, then we'd have to be choshesh for bosser shenisalim in ayin, meaning that maybe a raven came and switched the meat, and you're feeding my children here non-kosher meat. And now the Gemara adds a postscript. Lo acha Rav me'ahu bisra. Rav himself did not partake in the Suda. He didn't eat from the meat. My time. Well, why didn't he eat? I mean, he supervised, he didn't take his eyes off it since the Shkita. Right? He didn't take his eyes off it. Ella did nachish. Maybe he had another nichush, some other divine divination. I don't know, maybe a fly landed on the meat, so he took that as a sign from heaven that it's not kosher meat. Hama Rav says, oh, no, we don't rely on divinations. Kol nachish ha'edav v'kiliezer eved Avram u'kyorasam b'shol einu nachish. Right, Eliezer made a statement, if you recall, in his mind. He says, if the girl comes out and she feeds me the water and my camels, then she's the girl for my master Yitzchak. And so too, with regard to Yonasan, and the question is whether Shaul, his father, would actually kill David Amel. So he also did a divination. He said it depends where the arrows fall. If they fall closer here, closer there. Those are mutter. Those are the nichush that were allowed. Why are we allowed in those cases? If, let's say, you rely totally, completely on omens, that's called nichush. But if you already were inclined towards a certain action, but you just needed a little bit of extra, certainty or security that you're doing the right thing, then you can rely on omens. So therefore, Rav, although he took the arrival of the ferry at that moment as a divination, as a sign that there's a reason why he has to cross over. There must be some festival, feast that's going on in the house of his daughter and son-in-law. But he didn't rely on his decision totally because the ferry came. He would have probably gone anyway. And therefore he doesn't violate the Isur of Nichush. So then why didn't Rav eat from the meat? It wasn't that he had some sort of divine omen. There's no reason why, al pi halacha, he shouldn't have eaten the meat. The meat is kosher meat. It's God kosher. It's got the best texture in the world. You yourself, Rav, didn't take your eyes off it. Ella, seudas harishus havi v'Rav lo mishani misudas rishus. Apparently, this was not a chasana. They were celebrating, I don't know, maybe his son-in-law got a good job interview or something like that. I don't know what, but it was not a festive meal. And Rav decided I am not benefiting from meat unless it's a Sudas mitzvah, but not a Sudas Rishus. Now, this is based on Reb Shimon and Masechta Psachim on Daf Nun Tes, on Daf Mem Tes, who made a statement that a Talmid Chacham should not benefit from any Su'uda unless it's a Sudas mitzvah. This is what you call precious, an extra element of piety. Okay, now the Gemara says that again, in situations where you're about to make the decision, but you want a little bit of an extra push by finding an omen minish hamayim, what kind of omen should you rely on? Rav Badik b'Mavra. Rav would see whether or not the ferry was waiting for him at the dock, then he would take the trip. But if he had difficulty in finding the ferry or getting the ferry, then he would not go on the trip. I'm just thinking out loud if we could give a modern example of this, let's say you're planning a cruise, to join a cruise, right? And the cruise leaves every 3 months, but you got a break today or tomorrow. And you call up, and lo and behold, the cruise has one place left, or one, what do they call it, a chamber? One chamber left in the ship, and it's leaving tomorrow. That's a great omen. But really, you wanted to go anyway. So it's not like, you're relying totally on divination. Shmuel Badik was Sifra. Shmuel would take a look at a Sefer Torah if he wasn't sure, open up the Sefer Torah, and read a pasuk. Shmuel would not rely solely on the pasuk, but he would take it into account as a factor in combination with other factors in order to make his decision. Rabbi Yochanan Badik b'Yenuka. Rabbi Yochanan would stop a child on the street, ask him what's he learning in Cheder, tell me the pasuk, and he would interpret the pasuk based on the simple pshat of the pasuk that the child mentioned the pasuk, but that would give him an idea. They say, this is not the story I was going to tell you about my brother, but they say that when Moshe Feinstein was vacillating whether to go to America or not, so they opened the Sefer Torah. I don't remember the exact language of the pasuk, but the pasuk says, "Vayovo Moshe el Aaron." Moshe came to Aaron, and Rav Feinstein thought that was a good omen that he should go to America. Why? Because Rav Aaron Kotler was already in America, and Moshe now is going. Moshe Feinstein is going to Rav Aaron. You know this story. Okay, fine. Anyway, Kuli Shani de Rav, during all the years of Rav's life, Havikosavle Rabbi Yochanan. It's an interesting agadic digression here. Rabbi Yochanan was in Eretz Yisrael, Rav was in Bavel, and Rabbi Yochanan was so impressed with Rav and his greatness, his genius in Torah scholarship, that whenever he wrote a letter from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel to Rav, he would write L'kodem Rabbeinu b'Bavel, our teacher in Bavel. In other words, he considered Rav as his teacher. But Kinof Nafshe, Rav died and Shmuel took his place. All of a sudden, the letters that came from Rabbi Yochanan, Kosim Shmuel, L'kodem Chavereinu shebeBavel, our colleague in Bavel. He didn't call him his Rebbe, but he called him a colleague. No longer is he Rabbeinu. Omar. Now, Shmuel is very concerned because when the word gets out that Rabbi Yochanan is no longer calling Shmuel, the replacement to Rav, as a Rebbe, they're going to, obviously they're going to say Shmuel's not such a knacker. So therefore, lo yod halimidi de Rabbeinu ano? Do I not deserve that he, Rabbi Yochanan, should consider me as a Rebbe, as his Rebbe? I'm going to try to prove to him, not al Skaiva, because I think that's going to help me here in terms of my relationship with the community. I'm going to send him messages that he's going to see how great of a scholar I am, and then he's going to call me my Rebbe. Kosav, Shadalahu, Ibura de Shitin Shadi. This is mind-boggling. Shmuel knew the calendar so well that he was able to calculate the calendar for 60 years. Which month would be Chaser, which month would be Shalom, when you have to add a month. As an Ibriyar, Omar Hashta Chushmana Bialma Yoda, Rabbi Yochanan poo-poos it. Okay, fine, he knows how to make calculations. He understands science. Okay, he's a great astronomist. So what? He's not my Rebbe. So now Shmuel goes back into the rink and he hits him again. Kosav. He writes a letter to Rabbi Yochanan, Shodale Tleisar Gamli Sveiket Trefosa. Now, again, you can't take this Gemara literally. We've had this in the past where the Gemara exaggerates, but if you take it literally, he says there are 13 camel loads of parts of an animal after Shechita that were Safek Trefa. And Shmuel said, in these thousands and thousands of Safek Trefos, I paskin for each one of them, whether it's Trefa or not. I'm a total scholar in the laws of Trefa. I can identify Trefa. Omar. Oh, now Rabbi Yochanan's impressed. Islay Rav beBavel Ezel Echse. There's a Rebbe that I could learn from in Bavel. I have to go see him. Now, Rabbi Yochanan was already an older man, and to travel from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, was a big deal. Not like today. You know what I mean? You're in Chicago, you get on the next plane, and they even have nonstop El Al to Israel. But in those days it was very dangerous and so forth and so on. But Rav Yochanan nevertheless said, I want to see this man Shmuel. He's obviously going to be my Rebbe. Amalei Yanuka, but he was a little bit unsure of himself. Maybe he shouldn't go. It's a little bit too dangerous and so forth. He's an older person. And he goes to a baby and he says, Psokli Psucha, which pasuk were you learning today? Amalei, he quotes a pasuk, which is in Shmuel Aleph Perkaf Ches u'Shmuel Meis. Pasuk is testifying that the great Navi Shmuel died. And Rabbi Yochanan took it as a sign that the baby was telling him that in the interim, before Rabbi Yochanan could get on a ship to Bavel, Shmuel died. Shma mino noch nafse de Shmuel, and he decided he's not going. Velo. But in fact, that was not the case. Shmuel was alive and well. Ella, up in heaven, they wanted to make sure that Rabbi Yochanan would not go. It was too dangerous. He was too fragile. Ki heichu litrach Rabbi Yochanan. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa, Rav Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Bayis, Tinok, Ve'isha, Afal, Pisha, Ein Nachesh Simon. Like you're making major decisions in real estate. Do you want to buy this house, that location? Tinok, or let's say, okay, I'm not sure what the Gemara means by Tinok. Anyway, the Isha, you want to know whether to marry this woman or not, is you're allowed to rely on Simon. Again, you're going to make a decision in any event, but it gives you, although it's forbidden to base future business decisions solely on these facts, if one had success in his first business venture, after any of these happenings, I see what happens. His wife gave birth to a healthy baby. Immediately after he had a successful business transaction, so that birth is a sign that he should continue in those business ventures. Or if he landed a beautiful house, great buy. Or he married this special woman. Don't rely on an omen that happens once. If it happens again and again and again, thrice, then you rely on Siv, because Yaakov Avinu, when he decided, I can't send down anyone to Yosef, he didn't know it was Yosef, he said, I have a triple Simon. Why? Yosef einenu, Shimon einenu, and es binyamin tiklu. Meaning, if you take Binyamin, as the viceroy of Egypt, Yosef was demanding, then I might lose Binyamin. Now I've lost three children. That's a very bad thing. That would be a bad omen. Boy, Minei Rav Huna mi Rav. What time is it? How are we doing? Okay, we have another 6 or 7 minutes. Let's see if we can finish the omen. Rav Huna asked Rav, Becharuzin Mahu, what happens, Rav, according to you, that Bosash and the Salabin Ayin is also, because maybe it was switched, what happens if he had a string, a cord, and he had a bunch of pieces of meat that were tied up on one string, and now he finds exactly that? Can he rely, therefore, that this meat is the exact same meat, kosher meat? Amalei, alti shota becharuzin, harez simon. This was a silly question. Obviously, this is an identifying map. In other words, the chances that a raven would have taken kosher meat that was sliced and put into charuzin, into what word am I looking for? Strung up, and then he took it to another city and came back with non-kosher food, non-kosher slice of meat that's strung. That's non-thinkable. Ikediamri, Omer Afuna Marab Charuzin, Arezes Sima. What? Rav Nachman min adoyik lo gabi Rav Kahana lefum nara b'mayil Yom Kippurei. So Rav Nachman is visiting Rav Kahana on Erev Yom Kippur. Osu orve shadu kavde v'kul. So kavde is liver, kaved. Kulyasa are the kleos, which are the kidneys. And this is a day when there's a lot of meat, Jewish kosher meat in the market, because there's a mitzvah of achilas basar on Erev Yom Kippurim, and the ravens came and they were throwing livers and kidneys all over the street. Again, it's hard for us to imagine this. Amalei Rav Kahana says to Rav Nachman, Shkol v'echol, take one of these pieces of meat and eat it, even though it was dropped by a raven. And why was Rav Kahana so permissible? Today, all the meat around us is kosher meat. There's such a large volume of meat slaughtered by Jews that are not treifas on Erev Yom Kippurim, that therefore we don't have to worry that the meat came from some other, was transported here by the ravens. All right. Rav Chia bar Avin is okay. So he found a part of a kosher animal in his wine cellar. He lost it and he found Osel Kami Rav Kahana, Rav Huna, and he asked him, can I assume that this is the same meat that I had lost? Amalei Islu Simon Bagava. Can you identify the meat? Maybe it had a red streak on its left side. Amalei lo. Classic piece of meat, looks like all the other meats. Islay Tvi Usa Eino Bagava. Amalei in Kain Zil Shkol. The Gemara is introducing a brand new concept called Tvias Ayin. That sometimes you ask me, is this mine? Okay, give me a Sima. Can't look. Looks pretty simple. But Tvias Ayin, I don't know how. I mean, this is like Gestalt psychology. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Like I can tell you that that's my thing. And the Gemara in Elam Mitzias says that normally, if you find the lost object, you can't return it to anybody who comes and claims it unless he can give you a siman. But with regard to a Talmud Chacham who doesn't lie, there's not even a chashash to the lie, then if he says, I identify it, which is called Tvias Ayin, we rely on that and return it to him. Now, this, my friends, is relevant to Didei Nefashos. I'll give you two cases. Like, for example, let's say a woman's husband goes out there to Medinas Hayam and he doesn't return. And two Eidim come and testify, we saw your husband dead. And they ask, how do you know it was him? Can you identify his corpse? Tell me, Do you know that he had a tattoo below his left ankle? No, no, no. But we recognize him. And hopefully they saw him not long after he died, because after a while he can't recognize any dead body. But anyway. Well, here's another case. Two people come in and testify that Reuven murdered Shimon. And therefore, based on that testimony, I want to put Reuven to death as a murderer. Well, how do you know that was Reuven? I can identify him just based on Tvias Ayin. I know Reuven. Do I remember that he had a scar in his left ear? I don't remember anything. Rav Chanina Choza Ispad Le Gaba de Bisra. Rav Chanina Choza lost the back of kosher meat, found it. Also, Kami de Rav Nachman. Omalei Ischa Simon Begavei. Omalei Lo Ischa Tvias Ayin Begay. Omalei in came Zil Shkol. You could eat it. Rav Nasan Barabaye Itvad Le Kibur dit Tchelta. Okay, Tchelta is Tcheles. And in those days, there were fakers, frauds, who used to produce a blue dye called Kola Elon that they took from a certain tree, an extract, and it was not tchelis. And you can't use it for the mitzvah of tchelis, of tzitzis. So therefore, if you lose what you know to be genuine tchelis, you got to find it and identify it. So Rav Nasan lost tcheles, and he later found it. Can you identify it with a simon? Did it have a red streak on it? And use it for the mitzvah of tcheles because you have visual recognition. And by the way, the halachas we'll soon see is not only visual recognition, but even voice recognition. Omar Rafa, Meiresh Hava Amina, I used to say, Simona Adif Mitvias Eina. I thought Simona is much more reliable. You tell me there's a scratch on his left elbow than Tvias Ayin. Tvias Ayin doesn't really prove a thing. Right? For a regular person, we don't return it just because he says, I know this is mine. He's got to give you a simon. So that was my original position. And the whole idea of visual recognition of Tvias Aina is some sort of rabbinic creation. But I see that Tvias Ayin is on the same level as Simonin. We're going to allow you to eat meat based on the fact that you recognize that this is the piece that you lost. We're going to allow you to use tcheles, which is a mitzvah doraisa, based on the fact that you can recognize that this is the spool of threads, of tcheles threads that you lost. So we see that we should upgrade Tvias Aina to the highest level. It's reliable like Simonin. Again, in Aveda, there's a separate halacha about Josh Achicha Mimach. He has to give you a simon because you don't know when he says, "Oh, I recognize it." So what? Wow. I'm always amazed at the Talmudic mind. How does a blind man know that the woman in his bed is his wife? Maybe he's blind, he went into the wrong bedroom accidentally, and it's somebody else's wife, or whatever. I'm not blind, but it's pitch black at night, no lights whatsoever. Not even a little glimmer coming from the street through the tris, and I'm going to go ahead and have a relationship. There's such a thing as voice recognition. This is a whole story about Leah and Rachel on that night. Anyway, so if we're going to rely on Tvias Kala, because you recognize the voice, then how much more so should we rely on visual recognition? And I'll prove to you that Tvias Aina is at least, if not more reliable than Simonim. The Ilu Asu Beit Shrei V'Amri, two witnesses come to court and they say, Planyo Dahai Simon Vai Simon Kotel Nafshe. This person is a murderer, and when I say this person, I'll tell you by identifying him that he has a tattoo on his right tush, lo katlinen. We're not going to put him to death. We're not going to rely on Simon. If they say, well, I can't tell you that he had a tattoo or something like that, but I recognize him. That's what the Torah says. Put him to death as a murderer because two witnesses recognized him. So we see again that Tfias Eino is upgraded to a status equal to and not less than Simonim. Omer of Ashi, and with this we'll conclude, Teda, I'll prove to you how reliable Tfias Eino is. Deilu Amalei Inish L'Shluch, a man says to his Shliach, Karye Leplanya de Hai Simona V'Hai Simona, I want you to, deliver some package to so and so, and if you have any question about whether that's the guy that I'm sending you to or not, here's an identifying mark. Sufik yada le sufik lo yada. If it's uncertain whether he'll know how to identify based on identifying marks or not, then he should not be able to fulfill his shlichus. Even though he would not rely on identifying marks, which are simanim, but if he has visual recognition, that is reliable and he fulfills his shlichus. And that leads us to the next Mishnah here on the top of Samach Vav, which addresses the issue of how far you have to go, how much of the sciatic nerve do you have to remove in order to guarantee that you've removed the Gid Anosh. So that's on Daf Tzadi Vav for tomorrow.